Okay, welcome all of you to my presentations examining the interaction of mental illness and suicidal risk in the middle of a pandemic on machine learning approach. My name is Saahoon. I'm an assistant research professor at the IU School of Social Work. Data integration, the cross-system data analysis, and quantitative research method are primary areas of my research. I'm grateful that I could have a chance to work with the statewide person level, the answer CANS data. I want to ask my colleague to introduce themselves. Dr. Walton.
Hi, I'm Betty Walton. I'm a member of this team. It's such a pleasure to work with them. My practice, obviously, I've been in practice in behavioral health and then associated with the university for a long time. And so change is inevitable. And by building a strong team, we've been able to address things in a more progressive way. I just want to also mention that our topic, we're just delighted that you're all here, but we realize this is a sensitive topic. It's not only important, but it's something that if you've been around long enough in practice or in life, it's something that we may personally or professionally have experienced, although we're going to talk about this from a more academic approach. So just want to acknowledge that and thank you all for being with us.
Good afternoon. This is Hae-Won Kim, and I'm also a member of the research team and as assistant professor at Indiana University School of Social Work. And I've been working on the ANSA data, more psychometric properties examination, but also I'm interested in translational research, making the bridges between data and practice. So Betty, your point is well said, and it's a very sensitive topic. We acknowledge that, but we hope that our findings and the way we approach the ANSA data maybe could provide us some insight about how we can improve our practice.
Thank you. Before starting the presentation, I want to share the poll result. The question was, what experiences do you have for screening, treatment, and support in suicide prevention or the suicide recovery model? So let's see. Seems like most of us had experiences or had participated in developing action plan for suicidal risk. And there are 12 people out of 60 never get experiences with some kind of activity for developing suicide prevention. The second largest of us indicating they are participated in screening. It seems that they utilize the ANSA data for screening the risk of suicide. Okay, sounds good. It helped me to understand the characteristics of the population who attended the meeting. So let's stop sharing. Okay. Starting with the faculty disclosure, we have nothing to disclose. None of us have any relevant financial relationship during the past 12 months. I'm going to start with the definition of the suicide. It is considered as the death caused by self-directed injurious behavior with the intention to die as a result of the behavior. So according to the CDC mortality data in 2019, actually it's 2019 data, the suicide was the 10th leading cause of deaths overall in the United States, claiming the lives of over 50, almost 50,000 people. The for young adult ages 15, let's see, 15 through 34, we can say suicide was the second leading cause of death. The number of emergency department visits for intentional self-harm injury was also around 300,000 people. So think about average ER visit costing at least $2,000. So it was calculated in 2016 according to the Healthcare Cost Institute. In 2020 or 2021, the cost could be higher than 2016. So, and at least when we calculate the total amount of ER visit by the number reported in 2016, like 300,000 people times 2,000, the cost for ER visit and medical services associated with the suicide attempt were estimated at least more than $6 billion. The other CDC data report also highlighted the trend in suicide rate by sex. The male suicide rate remained stable and also higher than female between the 1999 and 2006. And then it increased on average by about 1.7% per year between 2006 and 2018. So female suicide rate was lower than male, as you see, but it also increased averaged by about 2.1% per year from 1999 to 2018. So since 2018, 2019, the rate a little bit decreased, but still is higher than the last decades. So such an increasing rate making us think about the urgent and effective intervention for mental health services to reduce suicidal thought and plans. Those numbers could be used as a baseline to understand to what extent your suicide prevention or recovery models work. SAMHSA's report also shows that in the year of 2019, 12 million adults aged 18 or older experienced having serious thought of suicide. Among them, 1.4 million adults reported they attempt suicide during the past year. 1.2 million reported they are also having suicide plan and the attempt together. So please keep in mind the answer suicide risk is intended to describe the presence of suicidal thought and behavior. The rating 2 or 3 would indicate the need for safety plan. We used a couple of the questions to rate this item in the answer. One of them is, have you ever had any thought about killing yourself? The other one is, have you ever acted on those thoughts? The last one is, when was the last time? So time windows applied to rate this suicide risk item. So focusing on the suicide risk item on answer, we can propose a possible causal relationship between behavioral health need and suicidal risk. One of the studies suggested the causal relationship between the behavioral health need and suicidal risk when the researchers consider psychosocial factors as a mediator. So you can identify the causal relationship between the behavioral health need and suicidal risk, also psychosocial factors and the suicidal risk. But when you look at the causation between the behavioral health need and suicidal risk, those psychosocial factors could be acted as a mediator between these two causal relationships. So utilizing these kind of items is getting more important in the COVID-19 pandemic because the suicide risk keeps expected to rise, and the need for timely, accurate suicide prevention model also grows. In specific, we need to develop the suicidal predictions, prediction model or prevention model for the adult with a behavioral health need or mental illness during the pandemic. So think about it. We can better serve them in the mental health system. At the same time, it is necessary to ensure to what extent the specific answer items could predict and prevent suicidal risk. So examining the intersection of mental illness and suicidal risk could be the foundation to develop suicide prevention models. So because of adverse effect of the pandemic, the increasing suicide risk and suicide rate is considered inevitable. In the previous studies, suicide risk factors impacted the depression, schizophrenia, addictions, stress, unemployment, and somatic disease. So these behavioral health needs and psychosocial factors were not fully explored to predict suicide risk. In this presentation, we focused on the machine learning algorithm to identify intersection of mental health need and suicide risk. For example, in the ENSA data in either 2019 or 2020, so we found 1,480 adults show the actionable rating on suicidal risk. According to such background information, the learning objective learning objective of these presentations, including identify the patterns on answer actionable item in behavioral health need during the pandemic among adult and risk for suicide. Also, we try to help you differentiate the pattern of answers actionable need before and during the pandemic among adult and risk for suicide. To describe what type of mental illness is another critical factors, critical component for this presentation. So we're gonna help you to describe what type of mental illness associated with the adult suicidal risk during the pandemic. Finally, you are able to consider addressing the intersection of mental illness and suicidal risk for developing the suicidal prevention and suicidal recovery model. So today's agenda include the presenting our Indiana study and proposing suicide prevention recovery model. And also we're gonna have a time to discuss with our research findings. So in the middle of COVID pandemic, the suicidal risk is likely to become a much more emerging concerns. People with mental illness can experience worsening symptoms by physical distancing, the fear, stress, self-isolations, and economic hardship. So it's necessary to ensure that we can apply the TCOM tools to identify, screen, and monitor the intersection of mental illness and suicidal risk. Unlike other statistical approach, the machine learning algorithm might help us detect different mental health states and identify intersections between the target response and the input features of mental health states. So in this manner, the primary purpose of this study was to examine intersection of mental illness and suicide, the risk for persons aged 18 and above who participate in the state government funded mental health services during the calendar year 2019 and or 2020. We used the statewide administrative data, including demographic and diagnostic data that showing the ICD-10, the diagnosis criteria, and self-assessment and treatment service data. So since 2007, the Indiana Data Assessment Registry for Mental Health and Addiction, we call the DARMA. DARMA has supported the utilization of the person-level information about their strengths and the needs of individuals with mental health and substance use disorders. So in this study, the participant took the initial assessment of NSI in the calendar year of either 2019 or 2020. They also received the second assessment or last assessment as the most recent assessment in the same year. Adult aged 18 and above who participate in the state-funded mental health services in the calendar year of, as I indicated, 2019 or 2020. So total number of people in our data set is 29,267. For the analysis, we primarily use the chi-square automated interaction detection method that was mainly used as a key algorithm in the machine learning approach. Tate, we call it Tate. Tate is one of the tree-based learning algorithms most frequently used the form of supervised learning method. Using the Tate, we could detect both linear, nonlinear association or relationship in the decision tree simultaneously. So in this study, it was used to identify intersections of mental illness and suicidal risk. Before moving forward, I first want to give you a brief introduction to the decision tree. So this is a typical pictures or the images of a tree here. And then you can see different features here. So when you flip the tree upside down, like this, the first box is called the root node, and the first split at the root here. The first split at the root of a decision tree should be like the first, the question. It's like 20 questions. It's a game of 20 questions. In figure, the first question could be like, are you female? And then in this manner, you can separate the data as clean as possible to maximize information gain from this split. So this is a final data, the terminal load. You're gonna have 4 different terminal load. So with the Titanic data set that indicated 1,500 out of 2,200 passengers and crew were killed. So this decision tree made out of those Titanic data set. Move to the next page. Once again, the Indiana study the progressive use of machine learning targeted to detect and monitor different mental health states and identify the between target response and the set of input features of the interest. The flow chart described how we select answer data for machine learning algorithm. As indicated, we have 69,000 cases from the calendar year of 2019, another 66,000 cases found in the 2020. We merged them together, and the total number of cases, 135,000 cases, but excluding duplicate. And then we have another, the exclusion criteria. So exclude initial assessment, not in either 2019 or 2020. So that's how we got the total number of final data to 29,000 cases. So this demographic information indicates the characteristics of an individual with mental health disorders stratified by gender and race, ethnicity. So when you look at the table right side, the prevalence rate of female with mental health disorders is 54.6% in 2020. This is significantly higher than 2019 data. We used the column proportion test to identify if there is any significant differences between the column. And then non-Hispanic, the Caucasian Americans made a significantly smaller percentage of participants in the 2020. That's 77%. So it's a little bit higher, a little bit lower than the 79.7% in 2019. Also, we found the significant differences between the two numbers. So average ages was similar between 2019 and 2020, but mean age differences was statistically significant. So the rate of individual with a mixed race also showing the significantly higher in 2020 than in 2019. This table indicated the rate of actionable needs item by year. For example, the actionable needs on legal here, and antisocial behavior here, and the substance use here, and criminal behavior. Those items showing the decreased the rate of actionable needs in 2020 compared to 2019. At the same time, actionable needs on items like employment, sleep, impulse control, depressions, anxiety, interpersonal, adjustment to trauma, danger to others, eating disturbance, and exploitations increased in 2020. So the listed actionable needs were from the multiple domains, and they're all included in the machine learning algorithms. I just selected a couple of items. For the model, we included all the behavioral health need item except the strengths item. So figure is a screenshot of the how to build and validate the modeling algorithms by using IBM SPSS modular subscription version 1. A connector links the connector here, the links the data source node here to the time node that define the field properties like a continuous variable or categorical dichotomous variable, and then connected to partition node that specify the 80% of the data set were used in the study as a training set to build a model, while 20% used as the testing data set. And also it connected to model selection, the machine learning algorithm, as we indicated, the child model was selected to develop the prediction, identify the intersections of the behavioral health need and suicidal risk. And then when you run this part after building up this model, then the rest of them is a result, the output from the analysis. So the child diamond here, this one included the decision tree algorithms and model fit and all other the descriptive statistics. So figure illustrated the decision tree algorithm. I'm gonna enlarge the size here. Okay, you can see the node number 0, 1, 2, 5, 6, 4 here. So node 0, as I introduced in the other slide, that is called the root node, indicating a summary for all samples in the data set. So for the 2020 data, total number of cases to build a model is 13,951. Among them, 840 indicated the actionable need on the suicide items. And also you can see the people without suicide risk was 13,111. The first split here made by chi-square test was an answer item, the self-injurious behavior. And then if the self-injury, the rating was non-actionable here, the rating, if the rating is actionable, that indicated 1, and then they connected it to node 2 here. So node 1 indicated there are 702 participants with a suicidal risk. However, their self-injurious rating were not actionable, as I mentioned. And in contrast, when you see node 2, that illustrated 139 participants were at risk for suicide and they had an actionable rating on self-injurious behavior. And the second split was done by age. The age less than 26 years old, above 26 years old. You can see the 41% of the participants indicating suicide risk. Their age is less than 26 years old. So this 41% is significantly higher than 27%, whose age is above the 26 years old. So this decision tree is a part of a result in working with the 2020 data. I'm going to summarize it. This is another data set with the 2019. So when you look at the 2019, the answer data, node 0 is same as a root node, and then it presents the total number of participants, at least for suicide, was 628, and that of people without suicide risk, it was 8,878. The first split, like the 2020 data, self-injurious behavior, and then differences coming from here, the second split made by the depressions. And then the node 2, it is called the terminal node. By only using the self-injurious behavior, we have 107 people with actionable needs on suicide risk. And then these people only can be predicted by using one variable, self-injurious behavior. This is a much easier way to compare two different models, 2019 and 2020 model. You can spend hours exploring all the details of the node, but making the long story too short. So these two figures above show the predictor's importance chart, which indicate the significance of each predictor in the algorithms. So based on 2019, the predictors of child list down the predictors according to the most important to least important. So most important up to 1, and then least important close to 0. So most important predictors is a self-injurious behavior, while the least the important predictor was anxiety for the 2019 data. When you see 2020 data, the most important data, you can see the scale of the importance is the highest scale showing in the item, the self-injurious behavior. The least important of the predictor is psychosis. So regarding the 2020 decision tree algorithms, we can see there might be some differences between the compared to 2019. So I want to pause here and invite Dr. Walton for the activity.
Thank you. You might have noticed, maybe not, we dropped a worksheet into the chat box that you could download and use, but we can just use it for discussion. So if we look at this overview, encourage you to think about the similarities between the 2019 data and the 2020 data. So what's similar and what's different? And are there any changes in the prediction models that we could use to think about possible prevention or strategies for intervention? So I'm going to pause there and see if you have any comments. If I know there are a lot of us here, but if anyone would like to just unmute yourself and make comments or drop some notes in the chat box, we can share that with everyone. So what's the same? What's different? Are there significant predictors? that could inform our practice, whether it's prevention or intervention. Well, let me just pose something that jumped out to me as Dr. Hae-Won was talking, and that was the emergence of age as a significant predictor during the pandemic year. And so I believe the cutoff was around 26 years old, younger and older. So think about the implications for working with young adults. I believe they had a 41% suicide risk or have actionable items. And I didn't jot down what the percentage was for older individuals, but certainly if you work with young adults, 18 to 26-year-olds, what are the implications? What could we do with that? As well as for our general population. I've noticed in the chat, some people are talking about policy decisions and strategies in states. Haven't read it all, but if any of you have comments you'd be willing to share about what your systems are doing as a systematic approach to address this, I think that would be very interesting to everyone.
And also one of the participants talking about adjustment trauma importance went up during the pandemic.
That's right.
It's almost like because people were away from other people, we lost our ability to practice the anger control, the impulse control, and have other people to talk to about the trauma we were experiencing and feeling with all the negative news and losing so many people. And that left people with no outlet for that information or for those feelings. And so it increased their suicide risk. At least that's a potential thought.
That's interesting. So thank you for sharing that, Jen. I think I read somewhere that, I don't know if it's national, but just in our state, there's a movement to set up a separate behavioral health crisis line. So instead of calling 911, when there's suicide risk, there are more focused, and you're not as likely to have the police arrive. You're more likely to get a crisis mobile team or get resources that are focused on your need. Is that happening elsewhere?
It's a federal mandate. I think it's got to be in place by 2023. So every state is developing their own. It's going to be, I forget what the number is, 988 or something like that. Someone will know.
Mm-hmm.
Also, one of participants made a comment on anxiety disappearing from 2019 to 2020 as a predictor importance list.
That's interesting, given what has happened. It may be more the baseline or norm, or may have been.
I was almost wondering that if it was just so much that everybody was experiencing anxiety, it wasn't so much a useful predictor of anything anymore.
Right. Well, thank you all for sharing. We just wanted to pick your brains, a lot of experience out there, and the challenge is always to take information like we found in this study and start to try to apply that to practice and look at how we can use it.
Thank you, Dr. Walton. The next slide, I want to focus on the overall, the prediction model, so decision tree model. That means I merged the two data set, 2019 and 2020 as a one set of data. So figure illustrated the decision tree algorithm where the root node present the total number of participants at risk for suicide was 1,480. They are from the either 2019 and 2020 data. And then the data of people without suicide risk is 21,893. So first split made by self-injurious behavior. And two parent node were node 1 and node 2. And then the second split made by interpersonal here. And we have a two terminal node, the final, the prediction model, the program with the interpersonal and self-injurious behavior. For the node 5 and node 6, the second split is very interesting. The interpersonal was the second split. And 1114 here, 114, the participant with the suicide risk and the non-actionable ratings here on the interpersonal risk. And then we found the 40% here showing the actionable needs on interpersonal. Also, they are at risk for suicide. So these 30, when we compare the 32% with the 40%, there's a significant differences. The table illustrated the rule extracted from the previous figures. So the path of the if rules was from the parent node until the terminal node. So we have technically we have 12 different terminal nodes from the decision tree developed in the previous analysis. And also, as I mentioned, the terminal node, I believe, let me check again. So here, terminal node 5 and 6 identified in the if table here. Interpersonal, yes or no, and then same number, 132 and 114 here. So this is the way to describe how decision algorithm transform into table. So overall predictor importance chart indicate self-injurious behavior as the most important predictor in the algorithm that combined the 2019 data and 2020, followed by depression, danger to others, psychosis, adjustment trauma, anxiety, sleep, and interpersonal. So the figure of the predictor importance for the overall data set is different from the separate years, the machine learning algorithm or decision tree model. In summary, we could identify the result as the following. During the pandemic years, self-injurious behavior, depression, adjustment trauma, danger to others, impulse control, anger control, age, sleep, and psychosis were identified as the critical factors associated with the risk for suicide. Danger to others, impulse control, anger control, and the age associated with the suicidal risk only in 2020, but not in 2019. The legal and employment were not shown in the 2020 suicidal risk chart, while they were identified in 2019. Overall, the self-injurious behavior, depression, danger to others, psychosis, adjustment to trauma, anxiety, sleep, and interpersonal or intersected with the risk for suicide. Based on the result, we can think about the suicide prevention model. This model of the suicide preventions was drawing on the US Air Force Suicide Prevention Program. Based on that, the effective suicide prevention model should include following the key component: identify and assist persons, individual at risk for suicide, respond effectively to individuals in crisis, enhance life skills and resilience, ensure access to effective mental health care and treatment for suicidal risk, support safe care transitions and create organizational linkage, promote social connectedness and support. What does it mean to the practitioner who use the ANSAR or CANS, the TCOM tools? From the practical point of view in ANSAR, we can suggest identifying the mental health needs and addressing array of intersection of mental health need and the suicidal risk as the critical implication for the practice. So you can then provide care plan and monitor and resolve mental health needs among the adults who are at risk for suicide. Based on our research findings, we can suggest the tree algorithm. Based on tree algorithm, we proposed this kind of the prevention model as a reflection of the Indiana study. We can suggest the suicide prevention program should consider the intersection of self-injurious behavior, depression, danger to others, psychosis, adjustment trauma, anxiety, sleep, and interpersonal problems. The different color indicating the different type of domains. So you can see the mental health issues highlighted in green color here. And I also keep thinking about the possible application of this type of decision tree algorithm to develop the state-based, the data-based, the prevention model. So I will be happy to assist you if you and your research team are interested in the suicide prevention model aligned with the actionable needs on item in your jurisdiction. So I can provide all the syntax and information about how to utilize the data by using the machine learning algorithm. And I'm gonna ask Dr. Walton jump into related discussions.
So we have a couple of questions posed for us. What are the challenges and successes or achievements in suicide prevention that you've experienced? And do you have any suggestions to overcome the challenges? We'll open that up for discussion, either verbally or in the chat box.
I think that the biggest challenge that we face in our community is just a lack of visibility of what happens when people are suicidal or when they have suicide attempts. It's just not talked about. And I think that fear still remains within our community, that if you talk about it, more people are going to think about it and more people are going to attempt. And of course, we all know that that's just inaccurate. And so I think just having the conversation, having more like PSAs and things like that, that get people to start talking about it and understanding it in a different way would be helpful.
Sounds like you're referring to it's appropriate to ask, are you okay? And have those discussions. And that's not going to increase the risk.
Right.
Other observations or ideas?
Idaho is doing a study right now on caring contacts and their impact on suicidality, which has been really interesting. They actually have a group of parents or people with lived experience with suicide who's helping to advise them on how to make those caring contacts, but they do them through the suicide hotline, and they're reaching out to youth and adults who are willing to participate in the research project to see how caring contacts can impact someone's suicidality, which is really interesting to me in light of the information that you presented there, showing that during the pandemic, there's an increase in people's anger and other issues like that when they're isolated from other people, just because caring contacts decreases isolation. It gives them contact with people. And when they first started, I thought it was a ridiculous thing to even think that just reaching out to somebody by text was going to have an impact on their suicidality at all. But now I'm really interested to find out if it does, what kind of impact it has. Because these are people that didn't have a relationship with them. So it's people who aren't in relationship with someone who's suicidal, who's reaching out and making these contacts. So anyway, I just think it's an interesting study.
That is fascinating. Thank you for sharing, Janet. Do you know how they're reaching out to people or making those contacts?
I do. So the initial contacts are from people who have indicated that there's a risk either with their primary care physician or with the hospital in an emergency room, and they're asked if they want to participate in the study. And then those who do, they're first reached out to by phone to kind of explain the whole circumstance and what, all of the different parts of the study. And then they reach out by text at specific intervals. And they actually have scripted things to say that we've gone over, like the families have gone over and said, I wouldn't word it this way. I would, so we've gone back and forth on that, and it's actually in process right now. They also did a second study that was an add-on study with the pandemic for healthcare workers and their experience with increased issues due to the pandemic. So it's called the PLES, P-L-E-S. And I know they're doing a presentation on it pretty soon, so you can find some more information about it if you want. Or you reach out to me, I can get you in connection with the people who are doing the study if that's something you're interested in.
Sure, we'd love to do that. So, and I think it would be great to maybe even bring that back to the conference next year. See what they learn from that. And the idea of having people with lived experience inform the process, that is cutting edge. That's where the field is moving also. And there's not a lot of research around that. So that's helpful.
That's a great idea. I'll actually ask them about that for next year's conference, because that would be really cool to see them do that.
Yes. Other thoughts?
I think what really strikes me is that we are able to identify these high-risk behaviors. And I would imagine that if we can identify them in youth and help them build stronger resiliency and stronger communities, that it would hopefully decrease the suicide rate as they become adults. So, I mean, this study can definitely be utilized to create policy at a federal level with identifying youth who are at risk and helping them throughout their lifespan.
Thank you. That's a very optimistic view of the future.
I think it's interesting, though, as you said that, the one thing that struck me is that my son had a very supportive interpersonal relationship. He had good relationships with lots of friends and was very active in school and very active in social organizations. And that wasn't a predictor for him. So it is interesting. I mean, there's always both sides of it, right? But any suicide you can prevent is completely worth preventing.
Mm-hmm. There's so much we don't know at this point. So, yes. Well, thank you all for sharing. Dr. Han, I'll turn this back to you.
Okay, it's a time for questions. Is there any question about the machine learning algorithms or the data set? Any question related to Indiana study?
It's not specific to machine learning approach, and I think it in the chat box and regarding to identifying suicide risk. And Linda, she mentioned that their agency using Columbia Suicide Severity Scale when any new client comes in their place, so that might be an extra assessment tool we could use in conjunction with the ANSA or CANS items.
Usually the machine learning algorithm is beneficial for the persons who minister the large set data, big data. The state of Indiana also has a long history of historic data about the ANSA and CANS. So that means it's a cumulative data. Sometimes it's the person level, we can track the individual differences or improvement or worsening by tracking their historic data. So those data is very complicated, and then the size of data is huge, humongous. So that's why that's the way to utilize the machine learning algorithm to simplify the path or identify critical factors in the building a prediction model or developing some type of prevention model. Not only for suicide prevention model, we can also think about mental health recovery as the ad hoc, much comprehensive umbrella term. Also thinking about the substance use, the recovery from the substance use. There's another target variable we had used. So many possible combinations or intersectionality could be explored or examined by using this type of approach.
Saahoon, you have someone, Brian, in the chat saying, asking if he should just reach out by email if he would like to replicate the methods in their own data. Mm-hmm. And then we have another suggestion. There's a Stanley Brown safety plan for prevention and crisis plan that Linda suggests. So,
yeah, you can. I'm gonna provide all the test syntax for using the child approach, but you have to have a same type of the software. I use the IBM SPSS modular subscription version. So if you download or get a trial version of the software, then I can give you the syntax. You can easily replicate our method with your data.
Do you have a slide that has your email on it?
Yeah, I can send you the slide.
Okay.
Also, before wrapping up my presentations, I want to express my sincere appreciation to the state of Indiana, the Division of Mental Health and Addictions, they are always very collaborative and then supporting us with utilizing the answer CANS data. And then my references all here and contact information included in the PowerPoint slide. Okay, I'm gonna stop here.